Welcome to the A/B Testing Summit. My name is Brian Massey, and I'm going to be your keynote today. In the time that I have with you, I want to share with you what I think is the importance of A/B testing, aside from finding ideas that generate more revenue, more leads, and more sales for your business. It is the experimentation culture that sets in around A/B testing, because A/B testing is not done in a vacuum. And there's some very interesting people that we call experimenters who are involved in this. And these are the kind of people that you want in your marketing teams and in your product teams. First, I want to start with a story. This is the website of finishline.com on November 18th, 2012. Finish Line is a major brand in the sports apparel arena, focusing on shoes and clothing. And this is what it looked like the next day, November 19th. This was a significant shift in brand. You can feel the excitement of the executives and the agency that was brought in to do this rebrand. Completely different experience on the homepage, very stylized graphics, high quality photos, and even bringing in content from the blog. They had a minimalist approach to their category pages and even used celebrity endorsements for their products. This was going to be a huge shift for this brand, but things did not work out as we thought. Finish Line lost $3 million within a few weeks of launching this site. And again, it was right before the holiday shopping season. And the executives, well, they didn't fare any better. So how does this happen? How does a really smart agency with a big budget, a really talented team of executives, and an established brand get it so wrong? How do they get it so wrong that they didn't realize they were about to shoot themselves in the foot until after they launched? Well, I think it's because they didn't have a culture of experimentation. Some experimenters could really have saved them some of the pain. And there is an epilogue to this story, which I will share with you at the end. Before I'm done, I hope that you will understand that experimenters are really important to your organization. And for those of you that are experimenters but have not been given the freedom to fly, I have some suggestions for you as well. First question I have is, are you an experimenter, or are you smart enough to be an experimenter? I believe anyone can be an experimenter, and the reason is because if a 14-year-old boy is a natural data scientist, I think anyone listening to this is smart enough to become an experimenter in their organization, to pick up a few tools and satisfy their natural curiosity. Let me tell you a story about my son Sean when he was 14. The 14-year-old boy I'm talking about is my son Sean. When he was 14, he built his first computer. Now his entire social structure flows through the computer and the internet. They don't go to the malls anymore. Everything goes through Skype and some fantasy world. Minecraft, World of Warcraft, Fortnite is now the big thing. So this was a big deal to him. If he didn't have a high-performance desktop computer to live in these worlds, he was to be left by his friends, a social pariah. And he was meticulous in speccing this thing out. The high-performance monitor, the keyboard with the right moves, just the right action on those buttons. The graphics card that would blast images at high frame rates. And even the mouse pad had to be the right dimensions for his game. He had spec'd everything out and was down to the last component, the motherboard. If you get the motherboard wrong, you have a brick until he can save another $1,000 or so and put together another one. And he had narrowed it down to 2 motherboards, both about the same price. Both had the features he wanted. One was rated 4 stars, one was rated 5 stars. So if he wasn't a natural behavioral scientist, he would say 5 is better than 4. You picked the 5-star motherboard. But even at this tender age, and none of you will be surprised, he checked the sample size. Statisticians call this little n, but he wasn't thinking that. He was just like, well, I wonder how many reviews are driving these decisions.
250 for the 4-star motherboard, only 5 for the 5-star motherboard. What he was doing is calculating the confidence interval, or the error range, whatever you want to call it. And he knows that a 4-star motherboard with 250 reviews might be a 3-star motherboard. It might be a 5-star motherboard, ultimately. But a 5-star motherboard with only 5 reviews could be a 1-star motherboard. It has a huge margin of error. No one ever taught him this. He did not take statistics. These are ingrained in us. And every time we go to Facebook and we use likes and shares and comments to decide what we're going to be commenting more on, we're using other people's behaviors to make decisions in our lives and our businesses. The Rotten Tomatoes freshness score, other people's behaviors to decide what movies to watch. New York Times seller. You guys already know this stuff. And you also know that behind this there's another calculation, the population. If there's only 5 reviews, how many of these could really have been sold? It's either brand new or it sucks. So he chose the 4-star review.
Do I really believe that you are smart enough to become an experimental force in your organization? Well, we've done it with hundreds of people, our clients, the people that work for them, leaders of teams, members of teams, Russian studies majors, and every one of them has earned their lab coat, has demonstrated that they have the curiosity and the smarts to experiment their way to success. So, are you an experimenter? You might be an experimenter if every time you cook your favorite recipe, you try something a little bit different. If you can't make decisions on a restaurant without reading a few reviews, you might be an experimenter. If you use Waze, even when you're driving someplace that you're very familiar with, you might be an experimenter. If you mow your yard differently every time just to see what happens, you might be an experimenter. If you continue shopping even after you've made your purchase just to see how you did, you might be an experimenter. If you buy a couple of brands of Band-Aids to see which one is the best, you are probably an experimenter. If you report bugs when you find them on e-commerce sites, complete with screenshots, you're probably an experimenter. And if you've ever created a spreadsheet that you're proud of, you probably have the disease that we call curiosity. Experimenters are smart, curious, inquisitive, unconventional, contrary, exacting, ethical, disciplined, determined, discerning, decisive. They're open, they're collaborative, they're coachable, they're teachable, they're flexible. They delight in insight, and they want to know the why of things. Wouldn't you be excited to have a whole team of people like this working in your business? Now, an experimenter really only has 2 jobs. There are only 2 things that we're trying to do in general when we're experimenting. The first of those jobs is to increase the sample size. What does this mean? Well, if you're working on a campaign, working on an email, working on a landing page, working on a headline and the copy, and it's just you, well, that copy is being exposed to one person, one brain, yours. So what's the sample size of the decision-making process? It's 1. Now, you might get some of your teammates involved to review some things. You might hire a copywriter. So we're starting to expand our sample size. The more brains, the more eyes that see it, the more input we get, the more likely we are to have something that works very well. So 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more people added to this increases your sample size. And inevitably, the executives get involved, and they add a few more brains and eyes. So your sample size grows to 10. Maybe you run a focus group, bring in 4 or 5 people, show it to a few people outside the company. Now you're growing to 10, maybe even 20 people. But what kind of sample sizes do we really like when we're testing our creative? We like hundreds, we like thousands. So experimenters really are finding ways to expand the sample size beyond just what's inside the company. And this is why they're so good at forcing the company to turn outward and not make all of the decisions internally, which I suspect may have happened at Finish Line. The reason that we want to expand our sample size is because we all have biases built in. Biases that show up and sit down with us in the conference rooms we have whenever we're looking at creative. One of the most common ones is the novelty effect. This is where we prefer a design if it's new or unique, or if we have seen it someplace and thought it was really cool. not a very good way to make decisions because we're not generally going for cool when we're trying to get our visitors to take action on our website. Sure, it could be a great cornerstone for the brand, but it can also work against us when we're trying to entice action. Confirmation bias is probably the most insidious. Confirmation bias is where we choose or prefer things because we believe in them. We might prefer a way that the copy is presenting our product because that's the way we think about that particular product. But are our visitors thinking that way? Well, confirmation bias keeps us from asking those questions. We choose the things that we prefer. And availability bias. We tend to remember those things that are most emotional to us or most recent. It's called availability bias because these are the things that are most available to us in our memories. What this means is our biggest wins, our biggest losses, and what happened to us in the last 7 days generally will influence our biases, will influence our decisions. So if we had an encounter with a certain kind of customer within the last week, we're going to be thinking about that customer as we make design decisions, even though that customer may not be representative of our larger customers. So this is what experiments are doing. They're keeping us out of our biases, bringing in external data to help us make decisions and avoid these poor decisions. So the first job of the experimenter is to expand the sample size. The other thing that an experimenter does is increase the relevance. So we can bring in a focus group and ask people to pretend that they're shopping for our product or trying to solve a problem that our product or service satisfies, but they're pretending. What's better is when we see actual visitors coming to the site, actual visitors interacting with our pages and seeing how they behave. We can increase the relevance of our audience, of our sample, by bringing in prospects and customers. But we can also use tricks like blinding them and blinding ourselves. This is why it's called a double-blind study. And this is one of the reasons that A/B testing is so effective. Nobody knows they're being tested, and we don't know who's being tested. So we can't apply our own biases, and the visitor is simply trying to solve their problems, even though they're part of a test sample. So how do we go about doing this? What are the tools that allow us to get a sample of a larger audience that is relevant? Well, many that we use before we ever go to A/B testing include things like session recordings. We can actually watch people interacting with our site. Yes, it's the most boring data that you can collect, but watching a few of these things, you're going to see things that you never would have seen in the data. You never would have seen in a focus group. You never would have seen in an online survey. Analytics, of course. This is a collection of our customers and our prospects trying to solve the problem that we solve. They're on our site, and many, if not most of them, are in our target audience. So we get a large number, thousands of visitors, and we can see what pages they're going to and what they're interacting with on the site at a very high level. This isolates problems that we see, and as we change things, we can see if more people are getting past those obstacles. And don't underestimate your team's ability to use tools like heat map reports, scroll map reports. These are really helpful for helping us understand where on the page visitors are moving their mouse, where they're clicking, etc. For instance, look at this. Is there any one of you who can't tell which one of these two pages has a scroll problem? I don't have to explain it to you. We've all seen weather maps before. But we know that the dark blue or black is probably an area where fewer people are seeing the page. They're not scrolling as far. And where's the call to action on this image on the left? Well, it's down at the bottom. See the lady down there? We say she's drowning. She is underwater because this page is not enticing the reader to continue on down. Whereas the one on the right side has a very nice scroll, lots of attention all the way down to the bottom. We can include these in our reports. We can share these with our team because individual people know this and they don't have to be data scientists. How about this one from a resort on Oahu that is totally focused on golf? When you take a big chunk of a small island and dedicate it to golf, you think that that's probably what people are coming for, right? Well, this heat map might say something a little different. The heat that we see on unlimited golf, not quite as hot as free breakfast. And in fact, when we look at the number of clicks, we see that free breakfast really is the most important thing on this list of specials. So the hypothesis here is that free breakfast should be at the top. It is possible that the influencers coming with the golfers might be more interested in free breakfast, and if you satisfy them, you get the golfer. So experimenters also ask, and there's a talent to letting someone know that you're asking a question to improve the site and still getting the truth out of them. One of the things we like is the Thank You page survey. We had a problem with a company called Automatic. This is a company that manufactures a little device that plugs into your car and connects your phone's brain to your car's brain. And it can do everything from track where you are, see if there are mechanical problems with your car, track how quickly you're accelerating and decelerating. I think that's just telling on you, quite frankly. The advanced one includes things like crash alert. If you have an accident, you can actually send a note to 911 and have somebody come and help you out. Now, there were two versions of this, a light, and there was a newer Pro version. Sure, the newer Pro version was more expensive, but it had amazing features. Unfortunately, the visitors were all buying the light version. So what's going on here? Are we not helping them choose better? Why wouldn't they, for a few dollars more, choose the more expensive and more profitable product? Well, we went out and we asked. Whenever somebody bought Light on the Thank You page, we asked them the question, what made you choose Light instead of Pro? And because they had chosen us, because they had bought from us, something set in called liking. And this is an effect where somebody trusts you more and likes you more strictly because they chose you. They're not losers, they don't choose losers, and therefore you must not be a loser. So we got a lot of answers, 154 in about 5 weeks. And to summarize what we learned was this note. I don't think I need crash alert. I have apps that track where I park just fine, and nor have I ever needed it. I don't know what live vehicle tracking means. I don't know what event-based apps means. I don't know what streaming apps mean either. You kind of get the point. We were featuring things that people didn't understand when we were asking them to choose. So we took this to an A/B test. And A/B testing we call the Supreme Court of testing, because it really is designed to give us a statistically large sample size, double blind, with people who are our customers and prospects and potential prospects. It's the best data that we can get. And so we want to save our best ideas for A/B testing. And this is why experimenters come in so handy, because they can experiment away ideas and leave only the things that are most likely to move things forward. And we took Automatic and we said, well, why don't we make it a little bit easier for them to choose between Light and Pro, because we still thought they would make the right decision if they understood the advantages. And we simpled it down. We offered only 4 items on each. This should make it easier for them to choose between the two. Here's what we found. We got a 13% increase in conversion rate overall. More people were buying. And we got a 24% increase in average order value, which means they were either buying more or they were buying the more expensive ones. And it turns out they were buying Automatic Pro. So this was a nice win. So experimenters are good for us. Experimenters force us to look outward, not inward. If you pair an experimenter with an innovator, you will have magic. They tease the specific from the general and the general from the specific. Now, if you're not used to working with experimenters, you might find them a bit tedious. They may come across as uncertain of themselves if they don't have data to make decisions. But as your culture changes, you'll begin to appreciate them for their little quirks, their curiosity. And you'll appreciate their tendency to take the time it takes to understand why things happen and why your customers are making the decisions they are. So ultimately, experimenters reduce risk in design. This is pretty typical of the way we go about design. At the top of this chart is the planning phase, and at the bottom is the launch phase. And during this process, we'll generally do user research at the very beginning. Might review a user study, look at our personas, but then the design and development team makes a bunch of decisions that don't get tested until it launches. Sound like finish line to you? The positioning, the copy, the imagery, the wireframes, the mock-ups all get done with small sample sizes of people who are inside the company. And it's not until launch that we understand what really happened. The experimenter causes this to happen. For each thing that we want to add to our design, positioning, they can test the copy using some of the tools that we talked about here and some that they will discover as a part of your organization. So the copy gets tested, then we can test the images that support that copy and move the value proposition forward. Wireframes, we can put those in front of people and test those as well. So we have mock-ups where we can get the approval of the rest of the organization, and then when we launch, we have confidence that we've designed something that is going to work because we have experimented along the way. We've taken the risk out of the launch by moving more of that into the design process. What does this mean for your organization? Well, first of all, your interaction with your design team and your agencies is going to be much better because you have these data points that are going to drive their decisions and your decisions. Less politics is going to be involved, less personal creative expression, which can be helpful, but if it's tested, you know that not only is it going to be great expression of your brand, but it's going to be a great result for your customer, which they will tell you by voting with their dollars. Novelty bias. If you really do want to take something cool and see if it's going to work, the ability to test during the design allows you to put these new ideas into the mix. So if your competitors are doing something that looks really awesome, test it and find out if they're actually seeing a higher conversion rate. Otherwise, let them go on doing that novelty thing and you do something that will beat them at the cash register. And as an experimenter, you're opening new vistas for yourself. And as a leader of a team, if you have a team that you encourage experimentation, you provide the time, you provide the tools, you are going to be more successful, and that bodes well for your entire career path. Finally, the experimenters create a creative safety net for those nutty, crazy ideas that could really change the brand, that could really shift things, like Finish Line was trying to do. Who's to say that there aren't crazy ideas that would have been positive in your organization if only you had an experiment that would allow you the freedom to try those things without impacting the business negatively. And of course, more leads, more sales, more growth. The experimenters are going to guide you there. We call them growth teams, we call them growth hacking teams in other organizations, but when the whole organization is doing these, it's more ingrained, and that is an organization that is just naturally going to grow. So the epilogue to our finishline.com story is this. They were smart enough to leave a copy of the old site on a server somewhere. So when they saw the horrible launch that they had, they were able to revert and didn't have their biggest shopping season cratered by this new design. This is another thing experimenters will do, is give themselves an out when they're collecting data. Roll it back. Today, though, when you go to Finish Line, you see something very different. How did they make these changes? I think this site is beautiful. How did they make these changes without cratering their sales? Well, I used a tool called Ghostery, and I snuck in and looked at what they have on their site. They have Crazy Egg, which is a heat map reporting tool, and it does session recordings. They have an A/B testing tool on the site, so they are running A/B tests. And they have 3 kinds of analytics on the site, so they are measuring the heck out of this. And I can only assume that after their debacle in 2012, they learned their lesson and began applying data to their decision making. I invite you, as a team leader, to make room for your experimenters, to give them the tools they need and a little bit of training. They will bring the most important pieces of the puzzle: natural curiosity, a desire to learn, a desire to understand why, a tenacity to grow, and these are the kind of people that you want working. Not everybody needs to be an experimenter, but I suspect you need more than you have right now. My name is Brian Massey. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the A/B Testing Summit.